Yeah, what is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Awesemo.com on the Contrary show, kicking off the weekend here as we head into week 2. I'm Dave Loughran on the Twitters at Loughy_D, joined as always by Alex Baker, Awesemo himself, and a guest with us today. Of course, we rotate guests each and every week. Returning guest here. I think he's been with us a couple years running now. Brian Hooper at Brick75 on Twitter. Hit the man up and check out. Well, you know what? I'll throw it over to you first, Brian. Happy to have you here, man. And before we get started, what do we do? We got the podcast. You got brick75.com. What's going on in your world?
Yeah, that's I do a podcast with Peter Overzet. You guys probably have never heard of him. He's a former TikTok star.
Nope.
Wednesdays, 8 Eastern. And I have my website, brick75.com. Sometimes I throw up some ownership on there and stuff. Some props once I get that prop app working anyways for football and NBA. But that's about it. Just DFS, mainly some sports betting. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, happy to have you with us once again. And of course, you follow Alex at Awesemo DFS. Alex, you're getting married in a week, man. Life's coming at you fast, huh? And now we got another big week 2 to talk about, but you're not going to be with us next week. So let's make the most of it.
Yeah, definitely. It's going to be hard having to take a little break during NFL season, but you know, some things are more important than DFS, believe it or not. Brian, I gotta give you some pumps here because your LOL show every Wednesday night, you've had some amazing episodes. Like one, you convinced me to not wear any jerseys anymore. I think the rule you came up with is you can't wear a jersey if the player is less than 7 years plus half your age. Is that right?
Yeah, that's part of it. Or if it's for a bet, you can wear a jersey. It's controversial, Alex.
If a player's what are the requirements?
Half your age plus 7. I think it's the same rule as if like you were to date someone.
Except reverse, yeah. Or if the player's in the Hall of Fame or dead, then it's acceptable.
So can you just wear a jersey if you meet all the requirements? Can you just wear a jersey out in public, no problem? Like that's not a violation?
Yeah, if you meet, yeah. And the other one was a family member. Family member is also acceptable.
Okay.
The other episode I really want to comment on is you had the greatest interview I've ever seen with the Whistles Go Woo. I'm almost afraid about having you on the show because like you're not afraid to ask the tough questions.
That was a good one. Yeah, people seem to enjoy that. Yeah, he's he was used to the kind of ESPN interviews, I think. We wanted to get into his process a little bit.
Let's dive into this. Happy to have all you guys with us. Hit that thumbs up as always. If you haven't done so yet, subscribe to the channel too. And hey, if you haven't checked out the odds channel, Awesemo odds channel, big things popping over there. And the Awesemo fantasy football channel. If you're playing season long dynasty, any type of redraft, whatever it is, you're looking for info and insight throughout the season, hit us up over there as well. All right, let's kick it off with you, Brian. I want to ask you a question just from a strategy standpoint before we get into some of these specific games and players. When it comes to a week like this, where it feels like there's going to be a lot of the field on one very specific game, that 4 p.m. game between the Chargers and Dallas. Do you apply any of that to your strategy or your approach or anything? Or is it something where you say, you know what, if I end up with a ton of that game, I'm fine with it, despite the fact that, you know, I think 5 of the top 6 owned players are from that one this week?
Yeah, that's a good question. So like my rule of thumb, like just from a 10,000 foot view, is you should be in situations like this. I usually use in baseball, like the Rockies at home back in the day when they were underpriced. There should be times when you're over and times when you're under. And if your process always leads you to one way every single time, you probably need to change your process up a little bit. And so for this week, it's looking like I'm going to be under for Dallas.
Okay.
But like, that doesn't mean I'm right or anything, but there will be times when in a situation arises like this, I would be over.
Right, for sure. And that's a good way of looking at it too. And Alex, when it comes to, we talk strategy a lot to kick these shows off because just talking about games and players isn't necessarily helpful if you don't know how to apply any of it. When it comes to a spot like this, you look at it and you say, all right, I do have 12 other games. And that isn't to say that all of them are equally appealing or all of them are as appealing, but you know, we have the boom bust tool for a reason at Awesemo. you have the top stacks tool for a reason with leverage scores and all of that. It's there for this exact purpose, right? To look at a game and say, this might be a great game, but there are other ways around it and other ways to potentially win, maybe better ways to win based on ownership.
Definitely, yeah. I think this game's a great example because Dallas's defense is pretty weak and their offense is pretty strong. So they've been in a lot of shootouts in the past. However, like NFL games, like they rarely like follow the game script that you want because there's so much randomness in the NFL. So on the top stacks, we try to calculate the probability that each team will be the top stack. Combined, these are about 16%, which is more than twice of your average game this week, which is significant. The ownership's there too, though. So if you get the right stack here, you're going to have to beat out all of the other guys with that stack with the rest of your lineup, which is a more daunting task than if you pick a lower owned stack. So I might be willing to gamble with some games that might not have as good a chance of going off this week, but will have big payouts if they do.
Brian, what's your philosophy on getting away from, okay, so essentially not getting away from the most popular game, and I'm not talking about just coming in underweight or overweight, but not getting away from it entirely, but instead maybe looking at, and I don't know if it doesn't apply to every game, but once in a while, what about getting away from the most popular options in the highest projected game and going to maybe some lesser owned options in that game? So you're still getting exposure to that game, but not the same spots as everyone else.
Yeah, I think that's like, especially if you're just building from hand, throwing in those game theory ideas into your process is always a good thing. The way I try to approach it though is like, okay, well, I know that these factors matter. How much do they matter, and how much they matter this week in this situation? How do these interactions all add up to something positive? Because you could have a situation where the game theory makes sense in your head logically, but it's just not enough to put you over the edge of just taking the obvious plays, for example, or something like that. So yeah, I would, if I'm just doing it by hand, that's all you can do really, is look at it the way you just described. Like, okay, well, I can pivot off of Cooper and take, someone lesser owned, and then there you go. But the only way to truly do that is to test it.
Right. Exactly. All right, Alex, let's dive into this. I think it's only appropriate that we start with the game that we've been talking about already. The Dallas Cowboys, the LA Chargers laying 3 points at home. So again, like you said, pretty bad defense for Dallas. Last week, I don't know how much last week really says, given that you're going up against Tom Brady, but they shouldn't be, even if they're markedly improved from last year, they're still probably bad. Great offense, elite quarterback. And then on the other side, Justin Herbert just racked up almost 350 yards against Washington, although I think that defense is a little suspect in the secondary right now, but that's besides the point. You have a 55-point total. Let's start with the Dallas side of this. And are there any spots that you want to get to that might not be mega popular? And how do you approach guys like Amari, Lamb, and even Ezekiel Elliott, who's coming in top 5 at his position?
Yeah, so with Dallas, it's worth mentioning that Michael Gallup has been ruled out for this game. So I feel like some people might try to target like Cedric Wilson, but I'm a little bit worried that Noah Brown coming back off the COVID list, he was inactive last game. He might be taking some of those duties. All in all, I don't think it makes a huge difference other than now there's only 2 guys that feel really confident in receiving the ball instead of 3 with Lamb and Cooper. They both look like pretty solid plays. And they're going to be some of the highest owned plays this week. It was interesting that Lamb only played on 77% of dropbacks last week. Not quite what you're hoping for, but I think that number goes up this week. But I think the big way you could possibly go about getting leverage in this game is by going with Ezekiel Elliott. If he runs the ball a lot, that means Dallas wins by a lot probably. And I'm not implying a correlation with him running the ball causing them to win, but just when they're up, they're going to run the ball more. He got most of the rushing attempts last week, and you're taking out some high-owned plays on both sides if the game script falls under that category. So I think that's a pretty intriguing play this week.
Brian, ownership's kind of flat at the top this week. There's no one or 2 guys really spiking, at least not right now. What do you consider high ownership on a 13 game slate? I know it's a very broad question, but if these guys are towards the top, but it's such a big slate that maybe it's not that outrageous given, where they're sitting in terms of they're at the top, but it might not be huge ownership.
Yeah. So again, my answer would be the same thing. Whereas, you have to have some way to test it, and obviously, the more ownership, the worse it is for your guy.
Right.
But I would say 30% probably. You got to really start going. Okay, what are we doing here?
So, what are you doing with Dallas right now?
So I'm under on Dallas right now, and I'm not hating the Chargers though. And an interesting guy I think is Cedric Wilson. So what are we thinking this week? 10% owned, probably somewhere around there.
Yeah, without Gallup, he's probably going to be. We have him around 9%. So yeah, you're okay. On the money.
And so I'm going under right now on him, and I don't know. For me, that makes sense. So obviously, I'm not picking any of my stuff. I'm kind of trying to figure it out, using a computer how to pick for me. But that makes sense to me. It's just he's an obvious cheap play that's going to be pretty highly owned, and the nut spot and all the double stacks. He's going to be in a bunch of them and stuff. So I kind of like that fade.
What about the tight ends here? Alex, were you going to say something?
Yeah. I feel like Cedric Wilson is a trap play because of Noah Brown. Last year, they pretty much played an even amount of snaps. Noah Brown was out week 1 because of COVID. He was eligible to play. They just didn't play him. So now I'm thinking that there's no guarantee Cedric Wilson is going to play as much as everyone's hoping.
What about the tight ends where you've got last week? I mean, as far as snaps go, Dalton Schultz played 57% of snaps. Blake Jarwin played 48%. But in terms of just pass catching and route running, Schultz was targeted pretty heavily, Alex. 6 of 6 for 45 yards. Nothing really downfield, nothing electric out of him. But, on a high passing volume offense that, for all we know, might struggle to run the ball if Ezekiel Elliott doesn't look better than he did last week, although I think last week was a little bit misleading. Do these guys stand out at all as maybe potential pivots inside the game?
They definitely kind of cross that threshold of being playable, which not all tight ends do. Schultz, as you mentioned, has gotten targeted a little bit more when he's on the field. So I guess that'd be my lean, but neither of them really are that exciting. The only reason I would go to Schultz or Jarwin, given the timeshare, is if I want to pick Dak and I need some way to make my lineup contrarian, then that would be a candidate. I just don't think it's the best possible way to do it.
Fair enough. Any thoughts on the rest of this Cowboys team, Brian?
Yeah, so I just checked my 150. I'm going to update all this obviously tomorrow before 11, but I had no Jarwin or Schultz, and I want to agree with Alex too. Elliott looks like a nice solid play too.
What about the Chargers, Brian, where you have Mike Williams, who had 12 targets last game, super heavily involved? You have Keenan Allen. You've got Jared Cook, who could be interesting. Austin Eckler. They have a lot of options to go to here, but a lot of really good ones in terms of the ability to just break slates with a guy like Williams.
Yeah, I'm going to go even or over as of right now with Allen. And a decent amount of Williams too, but significantly less compared to Allen.
Yeah. What about you then, Alex, with these pass catchers for LA, and of course Austin Eckler, who can do everything both on the ground and specifically through the air?
Yeah, I think Allen's price is pretty high this week at 7K on DraftKings. So I do feel like that's a little bit much for a player of his caliber. He was targeted 13 times last week. That's a great sign. I think that's going to be why a lot of people play him. He's one of our highest owned players of the week. But I just saw, as far as efficiency, he's not been great over the past year. And the Chargers, I guess they're about neutral pass run. So I just don't think he's a top play this week. So, and he's getting ownership like he is. The guy I'm looking at is Eckler. He was a little bit dinged up last week, which is a bad sign before the season even starts. And he didn't get any targets, but he ran routes on half of the passing plays. So I'm just kind of considering that a fluke. And if he continues getting the same workload he did last week, that could equal a big game this week. And you're getting a ton of leverage because obviously you want more rushing attempts if you're fading the rest of the guys.
What about Cook, Alex? I know he's up there in price, which could, or I'm sorry, not in price, in ownership, which could make things a little bit difficult, but he was pretty involved. He's the clear pass catching back on this offense, and he's cheap. I would assume people will prefer to get to Jared Cook in this game, especially at a tight end position that is a wasteland most weeks.
Yeah, I mean, he had a good performance last week, getting targeted 8 times.
Yeah.
He was only running routes on 60% of plays, which is about what you'd expect from a tight end, but it's not something that's making me want to play him. And as far as the age model, he's like off the scale at 34. So I don't have a ton of faith in him this season. So if he's going to be popular at all, I'm just not feeling it.
Brian, let's talk about Seattle and Tennessee a little bit here. And you guys know this, tomorrow, 4-hour, all of this weekly strategy show on the contrary, everything culminates in a 4-hour stream tomorrow, all the way up to 1 Eastern. Alex will be with us for the last deeper dive. Then you're taking 2 weeks off?
I like a week and a half. Yeah.
Week and a half. Okay. So we'll be without him for 1 week, but he'll be with us tomorrow. So check that out. But man, Brian, last week we saw Tennessee's offensive line get annihilated. I mean, Chandler Jones had 5 sacks on his own. They couldn't move the ball. And as a result, everybody in that offense suffered. Kyler Murray feasted. Now they travel out west to Seattle. They're 6-point dogs, but this game has the second highest total on the slate. How do we approach the Titans coming off of that brutal week, but with all of us knowing that this offense is super concentrated and can have monster weeks?
Yeah, I wish I knew, like if I could somehow predict what all these small sample size games do in football, and I can't. I'm not knowledgeable enough in football, so all I can do is, like I said before, is kind of run the numbers and see what it gives me, and then make small adjustments here and there. And so I got in my initial run here 4% on Tannehill. So I don't know what that tells you, but it doesn't mean, it means I'm going to be playing him somewhat.
What about how much of his pass catches did you get? And what about Derrick Henry?
Let's see. Henry, I'm going almost a complete fade.
Okay.
As of right now. And which pass catcher you want?
Julio and AJ Brown.
Julio mainly, yeah. Julio matching with the 4% with Tannehill. And I had Brown in my I almost won the millie last week and in that lineup, and I got him at 14%. So
okay, decent
amount of Brown, but then a lot of those are going to be one-offs or just non-stacks, I should say.
Right, for sure. And I think, Alex, you're going to see a lot of people, when you're hand building lineups specifically, you get people in these single entry 3 max cash games for sure. Although I don't think it's necessary in cash games to even mention these guys, but Julio Jones, 3% ownership. People were already saying he's washed. And now if you look at that game out of context, it looks like he was. AJ Brown coming in less than 7% owned. Derrick Henry less than 7, but God, the running back position so deep this week. Do you like Tennessee in this spot? As maybe a lower owned pivot stack off of maybe the game we first discussed?
To be honest, I never liked Tennessee. And the reason why is they just run the ball like an absurd amount. They're one of the more run heavy teams at 50% in neutral situations. The problem with Tennessee stacks is that if the stack does well at the start of the game, that correlates with less passing volume, which can reduce the upside of your stack. So I'm looking towards teams that aren't efficient, that just pass the ball a lot more, that if they get up, they're going to continue passing. Tennessee is pretty miserable in that category. So I actually I couldn't get the data from their week 1 because of a bug on my data source, but assuming that they're continuing to run the ball like they did last year, I'm not a huge fan.
So how much do you value efficiency in a passing game over volume, in the sense that like Matt Ryan is going to have a voluminous passing attack, but half the time it's just going to be shit, right? Like half the time you're just going to have very little efficiency. Whereas Tannehill, and I don't know the answer to this. This is why you guys are here to answer the hard hitting questions. Whereas Tannehill isn't going to throw as much as Matt Ryan. And last week, if we erase that, generally speaking, this has been an efficient offense that's, a lot of passing touchdowns, a lot of red zone opportunities. So how do you find the balance there?
So I think one way you can find the balance is you can do a game stack. So if you run it back with a Seattle pass catcher, you're kind of hoping that the game is a shootout. And that works really well with a team like Tennessee that it requires Seattle to put up significant amounts of points for it to be the top stack. So Seattle being a strong offense, I think that's a good candidate this week. But I think I'm just willing to gamble a little bit more on teams that have a high passing volume like Atlanta. Even though Atlanta was pretty terrible last week, that is one of the teams I'm targeting as they could just pass the ball 50 times and get you there.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Brian, just in terms of like efficiency versus volume? Inefficient volume, I should say.
Well, it made me think of this. I don't know if this will help you, but like kind of contradicting myself, or another way to think about it earlier, where I was saying, it's hard to guess. Like, that's why I like using it. If you are going to guess and you want to use like Alex's suggestion of using a run back, I think on average, that will always be better on average. And then always is probably, I shouldn't put that in the same sentence together, but on average, you want to use these kind of correlations and game theory ideas and leverage, even if you're just guessing, because in the NFL, like there's a lot of parity. So like, it's going to be close enough where you're not going to just pick like such a bad option, probably that it will be worse. It'll probably be like neutral even if you're picking poorly, maybe slightly negative to like picking some other combinations. But so like, just to say, I don't want to discourage people. Like you still should be looking at leverage and all the different correlations that exist in the NFL, especially, if you're picking by hand.
What do you think of Seattle on this side of the game going in against not bad, but a game that could absolutely shoot out?
I like Carson. I'm going to have him in
this week.
Cash and GPPs. It looks like I have 8% of Wilson, but not a ton of the pass catchers. So I'll probably have a couple of one-off Wilsons in there, which is risky, obviously, but that's something I do quite a bit. And
you're saying running Wilson out there naked, running him without any pass catchers?
Yeah, don't try that at home. And only a couple percent Metcalf. And who's their tight end?
Gerald Everett.
Everett, that's right. Let's see. Yeah, 3% Everett.
Okay. So you got some sprinkles in there.
A lot of Carson.
Yeah, a lot of Carson. I really like Carson a lot. The price point's too low for a 3-down back. There's no doubt. And Alex, Seattle's a weird team because Tyler Lockett is the type of dude that, we talked about this in the offseason for season-long standpoint too, when we did the mock drafts and stuff. He's the guy that can pop off for a week that just wins everybody everything who played him. And then for 5 weeks, he can disappear entirely, right? He has a huge like, what's he at on the boom bust tool? I would love to see what his boom bust rating is this week. Go ahead.
Honestly, like, there's so much variance in wide receiver performances that it's hard to like see Tyler Lockett, like who's had a ton of variance in his outcomes, and know that he's like a higher variance option than other guys. But he obviously has that upside. We've seen it again and again. He got there last week. So I don't think he's going to be under the radar at all, but definitely a solid option every single week.
What about Metcalf? I think what did he finish with last week? I know he was blanked for most of the game. Yeah, he came up, he scored 4 or 5, 60 yards. Do you look to Metcalf this week, or is that price point a little bit to stay away from?
I think he's a good play. I'm not expecting him. Like the old logic used to be, okay, Lockett had the big game last week, now play Metcalf.
Yeah.
But like, I think people have gotten over that. Like we're projecting the ownership to be pretty similar between the two. And I think both are fantastic options, although a little bit popular this week.
All right. Yeah. And what about Carson? Because Brian just mentioned, I think we both really like Chris Carson. Is he someone that's popping for you?
So Carson, I like a lot. Yeah, the one thing I'm looking at last week, Rashad Penny got injured during the game. He's out now.
Yeah.
So they weren't planning for Carson to get quite as big a workload as he did. At least this is my guess. They're bringing in Alex Collins off the practice squad this week, and he's a guy that they've kind of leaned on a little bit in the past, which is kind of contrary to his status as being on the practice squad instead of the active roster. So I'm not quite sure what to make of that, but I don't think Carson's gonna have like a workhorse back role, but this game environment is like so good that I still think he's a great player.
For sure. And I mean, I think he's still the type of guy though that could give you 15 carries and 4 targets, right? So yeah, maybe not 20 and 5, but at this price point, he's kind of priced appropriately for that anyway. Brian, Atlanta, Tampa Bay. We saw Tampa Bay and the Cowboys shoot out to open the season up the other Thursday. And Atlanta just got smoked. I mean, just an embarrassing performance at home. They're 12-point dogs, 51-point total here. I'm actually very curious to hear how you attack a team like Atlanta in a game that if they can score points is probably going to go insane. It's just, can they score any points?
Yeah. So yeah, I had a decent amount of Atlanta last week, and as of now, I'm not in love with Atlanta here. I got 5% Mike Davis, no Matt Ryan.
Okay.
I'm going crazy on the other side though. It sounds like we're talking about Atlanta this time, but I'm liking Tampa Bay.
Well, okay, yeah. Go ahead. Let's hit on Tampa Bay, and then Alex, we'll get your take on how to attack this game and not just one side, because might be some run back options here.
So they're my highest amount of stacks so far, and I just a ton of Godwin. 12% of Brady, which is a decent amount for a quarterback in 150 set. Yeah, I mean, let's see. Not a ton of Mike Evans, which kind of makes sense after last week, and 14% Brown too. So I'm one-sided on this one. I don't know if that's going to stay that way by tomorrow, but that's what I'm seeing.
All right, that's actually a good segue, Alex. I'm looking at our boom bust tool, which you guys obviously know. You can check it out at awesemo.com, awesemo.com/join. If you want to see everything we've got from ownership to player projections to the top stack tool, boom bust, all these tools created by Awesemo himself, sitting here right with us today, used by him as well, not just slapping his name on them. But yeah, awesemo.com/join. If you want to get access to all those weekly, monthly, annual, one sport, every sport, whatever you're looking for, we got you covered. Whether you're a hobbyist or a pro, doesn't matter. But I'm looking at the boom bust tool. Maybe you can explain this. Chris Godwin has the highest boom rating on the week, right? And that's at 22%. Mike Evans, who Brian just brought up, is down there actually cheaper than Godwin by quite a bit. And he's coming in at 11%, way down there. Is there that big of a difference between these two guys on a team where we know they're notorious? Tom Brady's kind of notorious for switching off between weeks and just getting to whoever's open.
Yeah, I might have to go back and tweak some of those. Obviously, I'm working all the way until Sunday to make sure these are as accurate as possible. I mean, last year, they were pretty much 1A and 1B last week. Godwin got 14 targets, Evan got 6. So that was a big switch. Obviously, that's just 1 week. So it's important not to read into too much, but that is a significant data point. So it's all about how you balance those. I think that makes me feel confident in Godwin. But I don't necessarily think that like there's going to be a huge gap between them. But I do really like Tampa as well this week, because last year they were the highest volume passing offense by percentage, only rushing 34% of the time on neutral game scripts. They got a huge team total this week. And the other factor that's kind of underrated is there are 4 guys you can stack up with Evans, Godwin, Brown, and Gronk. And that means each Tampa stack is going to have like a different mix of them. And you're going to be competing with less people if you get that stack right.
And Alex, it's one of only a handful of teams in the league where we were just talking about efficiency or volume. where they are efficient and there's a lot of volume, right? Like Brady could throw 50 times as he did last week, and not everyone's going to eat, but just because a guy might only have a 19% target share, it can be misleading when your quarterback's throwing 40 to 50 times a game.
Yeah, definitely. So the passing volume is huge here in both like stacking it up and just the consistency of these guys.
How do you approach all of these options, Brian, when it comes to a team like Tampa, where you've got Gronk, you've got Evans, you've got Godwin, you've got Antonio Brown, and then you have the run game, which obviously is not something we're all that fond of targeting here with all of the uncertainty. But even though they throw a lot, there are a ton of options to choose from. Do you just spray and hope, or do you end up with a lot more of one than the other, kind of like your Godwin to Evans this week?
Yeah, but same general strategies as before, where sometimes you should be spreading it and sometimes you should be consolidating it. And this week for me, it's consolidating towards Godwin and no Fournette, a couple Jones, a couple Gronk too. I think Gronk seems like a pretty obvious fade, just thinking logically, and bringing the age model in. This team is not great on that one. So, but yeah, consolidating it with a decent amount of Antonio Brown too.
You've had a lot of success playing tournaments. Do you always have a run back option if you're stacking your quarterback with multiple receivers?
No. My general strategy and advice I usually give is just make a whole bunch of lineups with a whole bunch of different correlations in there, and then pick from there somehow, develop a process where you're whittling it down based on these game theory ideas we always talk about.
Yeah, because Alex, I think there's a lot of people out there that will just run a blanket, stack quarterback with 2 pass catchers or more, and you have to run back with at least one from the other side.
Yeah, so the main situation you want to do that is if the team is a favorite, I think, because like if you're stacking up a team like Atlanta, where they have a team total of like what is it? Like
not good
20 versus Tampa. So like they can exceed their team total significantly, and you can still kind of count on Tampa Bay to keep them having to compete. Where if you flip that around, if you're expecting Tampa to pass more than they normally do, then if Atlanta only puts up 20 points, it's going to be hard for Tampa to like put up 40 something. So that's kind of the logic in general is if you have a team that's a bigger underdog, you don't have to game stack as much.
Is there any merit to targeting the Tampa Bay run game and thinking maybe the team with the highest total on the slate runs a lot instead of throws a lot here?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I think that the logic is strong. Like the problem is like the work share here between Ronald Jones, Fournette, and Gio Bernard, where each of them look like pretty bad plays individually. So it becomes like a pretty big disadvantage on average to try that, but it's an interesting leverage play.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting Ronald Jones right now is like 1%. So in the event that he goes off and each of the first 2 touchdowns go to Jones, and then they start running the ball more because they're up and they have a controlling lead, things could get interesting. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a high variance spot, and not the likelihood of that paying off seems pretty low. Brian, talk to me about Minnesota and Arizona, because this game feels like it has elite shootout potential, but it also feels like not many people are going to be landing on this game.
Can I give a little warning really quick first on the game stack?
Yeah, please.
We got a minute, just like kind of game theory.
Any strategies, the game theory is welcome on this show.
So it's, kind of the theme we've been rolling with here too, is so when you're game stacking, I think in football got I'm talking two bringbacks, you got an onslaught going. Was popular when Chipotle won the Millionaire like 3 years ago. You remember that, Alex? And then whatever one of the Burrito brothers does, everyone else copies. And so I think with my warnings of, don't just jam in a bunch of correlation, because it might not be worth the trade-offs of just taking two solid plays that aren't correlated. It really applies there. So like if you're just throwing in, it was Pringle, whoever the 4th string wide receiver on KC, you're right, because KC's got an awesome offense, like you really should, if you can't quantify it, now you're getting in the realm of, you might just be jamming too much game theory in there. And now that I said that, four stack is going to win Millie this Sunday. Okay.
But like with Millie makers though, just to your point, and to another question is, with these Millie makers, or just any large, massive field tournament, if you're running a stack with 3 pass catchers, right, and then like running it back with 2 pass catchers from the other side, how many points do you need from that game for that to work? When there's there are going to be just so many other high scoring players from every other game, or from so many other games, that, I mean, what is it? It's got to take a ton for to have 5 players from a single game, and all of them end up, in the quote unquote optimal lineup.
Well, here's one other problem. Like, obviously, like those games do happen. Like maybe once every few weeks. But one of the problems is, like, in a large field tournament, if a lot of people are game stacking, like, you can't just like take the ownerships of each player individually. You gotta like consider how often like a group of players is going to be owned together. So when you have a stack that's like Dak, CeeDee Lamb, and Cooper, or maybe that's a bad example because the salaries are so high, but if you have a Dallas stack, like Keenan Allen's going to be high owned in Dallas stacks. So that does negate some of the correlation that you get. Is just there's a higher correlation in the ownership to compensate.
Makes sense. Brian, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, if like the usual idea to answer your question about like when is the spread high enough, like there are some studies you can go Google, and I think Advanced Sports Analytics did one, and I think it was like 57 or total, something like that. I can't remember.
And that's pretty high.
But it's pretty high, pretty rare that even gets up that much. But it's like, okay, well, I mean, how do you know how much all these interactions are worth? Like, there's only, so like, if you're going to guess, go ahead and guess and gamble. And that's better than just picking your 9 favorite players or whatever. But like, try to figure out a way to like, is this worth it? Is it, quantify it by some metric, and then see if going with a stack in a fairly high scoring game is worth it compared to just, playing some other game theory angle.
Are you happy to run quarterbacks that aren't mobile, like pocket quarterbacks on their own without any pass catchers in large field tournaments?
Like if I was hand building, I would probably never do that. But like if I'm making thousands and thousands of lineups, I would throw some of those in there and see how, through my process, if any pop. And if they do, this is kind of what I talk about on my show too, is like, if you're hand building and you have like one guy, you have a guy who's like 35% owned and he's only in one of your 150, well, you probably should get rid of him. You're so far under the field, it's probably not worth it.
Right.
But if you have a process that you're really confident in, and it's well, then that's just the 150th lineup, just roll with it. It's fine. So it really depends on like how you're going about this. Like if you're more hand building and guessing or feel, or however you want to define it, then I would kind of go with those rules of thumb of like, I'm so far under this, I'm under leveraged that, like, as someone might say, I'm going to get rid of them. But like, if the DFS gods came down with 150 lineups and said, these are the best that you could think of, and it's got you got one lineup of a guy who's 35% owned, you roll with it. Right. So that's how I look at it.
In the same vein, Alex, what makes a good under-owned, like what makes a good low-owned game a good leverage stack? We have the leverage scores. You talk about some games that you like more than the field. What makes them good? Like use Minnesota and Arizona, for example. Would you qualify that as good, not good, just middle of the road, and why?
So here's the big problem is, like, for an NFL game to really like go off as a game stack, like you need the losing team to have the ball a lot. So like if there's like the losing team scores and then the team on the other side's losing, they're going to have that incentive to really push the pace. The problem happens when the leading team controls the ball. It really slows down the game, and then you end up with less plays and less guys getting there. So it's just impossible to know which games are going to kind of just happen to fall into that game script. Right. So it's as good a chance that Minnesota, Arizona does as Dallas versus the Chargers because the spread is almost the same. So that's why I look at a game like Minnesota and Arizona. Now, both teams are pretty run heavy, but I always like the Arizona stacks because Kyler Murray just adds a lot individually. So that means you don't have to stack them up with as many players. Minnesota, I'm not as fond of, but they have two guys that you can stack up basically. I guess KJ Osborne's looking pretty good as well. So
he was really involved last week.
Yeah, so that might be a reason I like Minnesota more this year is just because with three guys to stack instead of two, you're kind of reducing the amount of overlap you have with other lineups.
Right, and I know game theory and all of this is kind of your wheelhouse, so hopefully you're cool with me directing those kind of questions to you.
Sure.
Last year we saw several weeks where you were getting like a Dalvin Cook, Justin Jefferson, Millie Maker lineup winner without Kirk Cousins, right? Because that lineup is so concentrated, or Dalvin Cook and Adam Thielen without Kirk Cousins. And we saw it happen a couple times with Tennessee too, AJ Brown and Derrick Henry. What is your opinion on those type of builds? Because I've seen the Millie Maker winner last week had Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce and no Patrick Mahomes, which is crazy, but he needed a way to get those 8K plus guys into his lineup.
I mean, if I'm hand building again, that's probably never going to happen. And, but if you do make enough lineups, you know, I don't think like, let's say I'm going to use Fantasy Cruncher. I'm not going to force that, you know, it can't be two players from the same team. Like three maybe, but not two.
Without the quarterback, you mean?
Without the quarterback.
Right.
Yeah. Without the quarterback in their rules. So, you know, if you're doing this from a sim perspective, that lineup's never going to come up. I mean, not never, but you know what I mean? Basically never, because if Kelce and Hill are going to go off, like I doubt that's going to make up and beat all the other combinations just for the fact that you don't have Mahomes. And he wasn't even that high owned really last week. So I just don't see that ever even happening either way. And what are we doing here? We're looking at a couple of Millie Maker winning lineups. Like, I don't think that's the best way to, you know, get your game theory.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
I guess what I was saying though is more so like running back receiver from the same team where they only have three options that ever touch the ball. You know what I mean?
With no QB.
Yeah. And not the Kelce Hill, because that seemed kind of preposterous, but
right.
Like a Dalvin Cook and a Jefferson doesn't seem that crazy when, you know, you have a guy in Cousins that might only throw for 2 touchdowns, but 150 and a score might go to Jefferson, and then Dalvin Cook does the heavy lifting on the ground.
No, then I'm fine with that. Like, I don't know if I would build that. I mean, who knows? But like, I definitely wouldn't rule against it in FC. And if it all made sense in one of my 150s, if I was building by hand, which I don't, but I would too. What do you think, Alex? I'm fine with that.
Yeah, so the thing you want to avoid in lineup construction is like boxing yourself out of a win. So like in this particular lineup we're discussing with Mahomes not being in it with Hill and Kelce, I think he went with a really cheap quarterback. So there was like, he wasn't even close to being able to get Mahomes in the lineup. So I wouldn't consider that necessarily a bad construction by default. The bad thing is like, okay, so you have 2 pass catchers from one team, and you just like arbitrarily had like a quarterback with one pass catcher that were about the same price also in the lineup, where it's like, okay, well, if these 2 wide receivers go off, then like you have the wrong quarterback. So you're kind of boxed out of the winning lineup by default. So you just want to avoid not having the correlated play when you could easily get it in there.
Well, what about like a highly concentrated team, just running back and receiver? Say Mike Thomas is healthy, Alvin Kamara, Mike Thomas. There's no one else in that team, right? Cook, Cook Jefferson, Henry, Julio Jones, something like that.
Yeah, so I think Dalvin Cook and Jefferson, it's a little bit different than Kamara, where Kamara does a lot of his damage by receiving.
That's fair, yeah.
So with Cook, I have no problem like having Cook and Jefferson without Cousins. With New Orleans, it might be a little bit closer, but the fact that one player gets running production, the other is receiving. I think that's fine in general. There's just not really any correlation there that is advantageous, I would say, where it's not an advantage to have Cook and Jefferson in the same lineup just as much as it's not like a disadvantage.
Gotcha. All right. So Brian, are you getting to this Minnesota-Arizona game?
Not a ton. You guys mentioned Osborne. I got a couple of him. And now this is like the third or fourth DFS show I've heard mention him. So I wonder what his ownership's going to be like. I have no Cousins. Jefferson, I think I have 7%. Let me check here. Yeah. 7%, Justin Jefferson.
Okay. Alex, you wanted to talk a little bit about Vegas and Pittsburgh, and we'll get to our top fades, top pivots of the week as we do every single show. And then just for some fun here, our top bets or player props for week 2. Of course, you have the Awesemo odds channel for all of that good stuff, but we'll just give you a taste to close this one out. What are you doing with a guy like Waller, who had 19 targets last week, just absolute target monster against a tough Pittsburgh defense? Is this a game that you think has sneaky shootout potential?
I think it's pretty intriguing. Obviously, Josh Jacobs being out creates some value on the Vegas side. Not necessarily for Waller, but he's a fantastic play as well. The main thing I'm looking at with this game is Naji Harris is getting all the hype this week for good reason. I mean, he got 100% of the workload last week. He's a good receiving back as well. So in a game where Pittsburgh's big favorites, he could easily have a strong performance, and he's not expensive. But what I'm thinking with this is I'm not huge on getting like leverage over like one player on a team versus another, but this is a really standout opportunity where if you just think that like the way the game could play out is Ben Roethlisberger just passes a lot of times, and going with Claypool and Johnson with Roethlisberger, like it just has like a lot of leverage over all these Naji Harris lineups. So I don't mind playing the game script going more pass heavy for Pittsburgh here.
Brian, what about you when it comes to Naji Harris in this game in general? So 6-point favorites, Pittsburgh at home, 47-point total.
Yeah, well, he's your cash game back, obviously, and
sure.
I have 23% right now, so I'm not gonna fade. So yeah, I don't think there's no way around it. I think you're gonna have to play him a decent amount.
Yeah, I don't think there's any two ways around it either.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Alex, do you look towards the passing game? Okay, so this is kind of what you're talking about, right? Or where we talked about getting leverage off a player in the same team. You just mentioned you're not a huge fan of it, but when it comes to Pittsburgh and you have Deontay Johnson, you have Juju, you have Claypool, like Pittsburgh stacks with Roethlisberger against the Raiders, whose defense is probably going to be less than stellar outside of what looked like a pretty good pass rush last week.
Yeah, definitely. I think like Pittsburgh, they're one of my favorite teams to stack because they rush so little. It might change with Naji Harris. Last week, they were so miserable running the ball that like they abandoned the run, I'm pretty sure, but it's hard to know exactly what happened. But last year, they didn't run the ball very much at all. So it gives me a lot of confidence with Claypool, Deontay Johnson, and Juju Smith. The guy to avoid is Ebron. He's facing more of a timeshare now that they drafted Pat Freiermuth. Ebron was only out there 45% of dropbacks. So I'm mainly sticking to 3 wide receivers.
All right. So where are we at here? We got any other spots? Any spots you want to hit on, Brian, Alex? Any other spots before we get to close this one out with our top props and fades and pivots?
I mean, I don't know if it might be going in with fades and pivots, but I have a lot of cooks in Houston. I don't know what that might be crazy. I might have to dive deeper into that, but
well, he's good. The matchup isn't amazing, but when it comes to somebody like Jared or Brandon Cooks, there's nobody else on this team that Tyrod Taylor can throw to. I mean, you have to assume that his target share is going to be very high this year.
And what I think you guys have him like under 2% ownership right now too, right?
He is at 4%.
Oh, okay. Maybe I was looking at it.
Yeah, maybe it updated recently, but yeah, you got 4%. That game is kind of strange though, Alex, because they're 12-point dogs on the road. They're coming off a game where they just shocked the world, beating the piss out of a bad Jacksonville team. But Tyrod Taylor didn't look bad at all. I mean, they actually looked good. I think that might be more of an indictment upon Jacksonville than praise on Houston, but still they looked competent at least. And Cooks had a big game, but now is this just a spot where Nick Chubb runs wild on them and Cleveland holds the ball for 45 minutes as a 60-minute game?
Definitely could happen. Like obviously 1 week of Houston being good isn't really enough for us to have a ton of faith in them, given that they were supposed to be the worst team coming into this week. The one thing that did surprise me about Houston is I assumed that going from Watson to Tyrod Taylor, they would go much more run heavy, but they were at 45% last week. Last year, they're at 38%. So, like I said, it's about what I would expect. I don't have much reason, I think, to go to anyone on Houston, but definitely isn't the craziest thing to take the best player from a team that's not popular.
Do you have any Elijah Mitchell this week, Brian?
Yeah, I think of 6%.
Okay. How spread out do you get their running back exposures? I mean, every week's different, of course, but are you pretty flat in terms of exposure to a lot of these guys?
Well, like I said, I think I had 30,
a lot of Naji, 23%
yeah,
Naji.
Yeah. Carson, they're over 30%, Elliott, 10%. So I don't know if you consider that spread out. It usually, for me, it usually kind of looks like pitcher ownership in baseball, but like a little bit less in a 150, which kind of makes sense, I think, logically. But yeah, spread out, but not crazy.
What about you, Alex? You run crunches yet?
I haven't built lineups yet. I am feeling like I might be under the field on Elijah Mitchell, though. I just last week, it's tough to read into what happened with Trey Sermon being inactive, but it seemed like none of the beat writers really expected that. So I don't really have a great sense of the running back hierarchy now that Sermon is going to be active this week. It wouldn't be surprising if Sermon got more rushing attempts than Mitchell and it was some sort of disciplinary thing, but yeah, that's just making me not feel confident in Mitchell, where I feel like I'm kind of expecting him to get half the rushing work. And given that he's like kind of the popular name that everyone's talking about, that might not be a place I want to go.
Sometimes it just feels like Kyle Shanahan wants to mess with these guys' heads.
Yeah.
It's really weird.
Seems to be what's happening with Brandon Ayuk too. Like right. He had that injury, which made it a little bit more like reasonable, but they're saying that he's going to get a starting job back this week, which is kind of interesting.
Shanahan's just always so cryptic about things too. You know, he'll be like, hey, this guy sucks. And then in the next breath, he'll be like, but that injury is why he sucks. You know, he's just, you never know what he's saying. I think Elijah Mitchell could have a lot of work this week. I really do. I mean, you could be right. If it was a disciplinary thing, then we're all in trouble. But well, anyone playing Elijah Mitchell, but if it wasn't a disciplinary thing and Elijah Mitchell, because remember, he drafted Mitchell this year and we've seen this happen before. Like Aaron Jones was drafted way after Jamal Williams and Aaron Jones became the clear top back in Green Bay. It's happened a lot, but he wasn't even active last week. If it wasn't disciplinary and it was just like, you're not ready, then yeah, I think Mitchell could get a lot of opportunity, but yeah, there's a lot of question marks there as well. Anyway, we got 5 minutes to go here. Almost 450 people watching. We could hit that 100 like mark. That'd be fantastic. Get that ratio up a little bit. As always, appreciate you guys watching on a Saturday afternoon. Let your people know about this too. And but because I will probably forget at the end of the show, one more time, tell everyone where they can find you and all of your work.
Twitter is Brian Hooper _ Brick75. You search for that, you'll probably find it. All these guys follow me too. So Lulz, my gambling podcast, Wednesdays at 8. And brick75.com is my website. I do sometimes like ownership projections and prop bets and put them up there. I try to do fairly regularly. So
check it all out. And hey, while you guys are at it, Jock Market is the sponsor of this show on The Contrary. If you haven't heard, they've turned fantasy sports into a stock exchange, so you don't have to wait till the end of the game to make money. Jock Market allows you to buy and sell shares of players in real time with real money with guaranteed payouts for all of the shares at the end of the night. You got MLB, NBA, NHL, PGA, all of that good stuff. Every hour, every second, down to every second, you can win money of any match or any game. But the best part, if you use the pregame IPO to pick up shares of your favorite players, you could buy, sell, or hold them during the game based on your analysis. So download the app. If you want to get started, use the promo code, which is exclusive to Awesemo members. Use the promo code Awesemo, AWESEMO, for up to a $50 bonus on your first deposit. Again, straight for the Awesemo community. Awesemo is the promo code. Get your $50. Check it out. I think you'll enjoy it. Jock Market, sponsor of On the Contrary. All right, boys, let's get to the fun part here. Alex, we'll go to you first. Top fade, top pivot of the week. And that doesn't mean your fade, you're going to have 0%, just maybe market or significantly below the field.
Yeah, I think my top fade of the week is just this Dallas Chargers game stack. In general, like I feel like if you just take the field of the rest of 12 games and just have a good portfolio of those, you're going to come out ahead of taking this game stack because of how popular it is.
All right. What about the pivot?
The pivot is just the other 12 games, but some of the ones I like, I think the Tampa Bay Atlanta stack popular, but I think that one is pretty promising. Pittsburgh stack I really like. And then I think the Rams, they went very pass heavy last week, even though they won. I think that's a very sneaky spot where Stafford looked amazing, and it looks like he's a lot lower owned than this particular game.
How about you, Brian? Top fade, top pivot of the week.
Yeah, looks like the same thing with Alex. I'll probably be under on Cooper. Not a full fade, obviously, but he'll be in my cash game. So we'll see how that all works out. And then, so the pivot, then I actually like the Chargers more than Alex here a bit. So the other side of that. You know, some of the guys I've been touting already, Tampa Bay. I agree with Alex. I got some Pittsburgh stacks in there too. But yeah, that about sums it up, I think.
All right. So I'll go pivot first. And you mentioned Brandon Cooks earlier, just as like a lower on play. That's interesting. I haven't made lineups yet, but I am pretty intrigued by this Minnesota-Arizona game. I think it has a lot of shootout potential. Just don't know how well it works. Noah Fant's getting a lot of ownership. That seems like a lot in a game where they could control this and just run the football a lot. Not to mention that even without Judy, you still have Sutton, you still have Patrick, you still have Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams in the backfield. It's a good spot, but almost 20% for Noah Fant, who is really yet to prove himself at the NFL level due to injuries and a bunch of other things. That just seems like a lot. So probably be underweight on him. Now, Brian, let's go to you. Favorite bet or prop, whatever you want of the week, you can go anywhere.
Well, hopefully I can get my props app working by the end of the day today, and they can go to my website and see everything that I'm going to bet. But I like this is purely a selfish play since I haven't run my numbers, but I'm going to give one anyways is Godwin's overs. Cause I need him for best ball, my season long DFS. So I just want it. I'm not saying it's a good bet, but that's what I want.
I love it. All right. Everybody bet the Godwin overs is what Brian's saying. All right, Alex, what do you got?
All right, I got two. I'm always looking for the playing time edges here. So the first one I saw was Rondale Moore under 40.5 receiving yards. He only played 38% of the dropbacks last week. He's targeted 5 out of 14 times. That's just an unsustainable rate. So there's a chance you earn more playing time, but I'm willing to bet the under there. And then Mecole Hardman over. He played on 84% of dropbacks last week. Well, only got 3 targets. I assume his target share is going to be a lot higher than that. So I think in that offense, he's going to do pretty well. And the line's only 36.5.
I like it. I'm going to go James Robinson over 2.5 receptions. It was super disappointing last game. No doubt about that. And anybody that drafted him in season long is not feeling very good right now at all. But you know what? they're likely going to be playing from behind again. This team is not good. They throw a lot. Urban Meyer doesn't want to run the football. And James Robinson ran 33 routes last game. He's going to be out there as long as he's not dropping passes. I think he cruises over 2.5. So 3 receptions or more. Feel pretty good about that. Anyway, Brian, man, this has been great. A lot of good information from both of you guys today. Appreciate you hanging out. Brian Hooper __ on Twitter.
That's
I
right.
just always search Brick75.
Yeah, that'll find it either way.
At Awesemo DFS. I'm at Loughy _D. As always, say what's up to our boy Jordan Klein. Appreciate you producing on the weekend. And what do we got coming up next? I'm so good at my job, I forgot to even look. 3 o'clock, MMA Live Before Lock. Pete Rogers, Jason Floyd, always a good show. We'll catch you back here for week 3. And remember, tomorrow, all of this week culminates for a 4-hour live stream taking you up to lock. We'll see you there. Peace.